Hello and welcome to day 2 of the Azure CSP workshop, where we now concentrate on building the lab for our fictitious company Contoso. My name is Daniel Baker and I'm the Partner Development and Learning Specialist for Microsoft here in the UK. I have 20 years experience in IT, 17 of which as a Microsoft certified trainer specializing in public and private clouds. If you have any questions or feedback, then please feel free to reach out to me either through email or Twitter, because I'm always happy to hear from you. In today's session, we will concentrate on building the proof of concept for Contoso. We will build the virtual network, we will build the virtual network gateway, and then create the VPN client. Once that is done, we will build 2 virtual machines and then use desired state configuration to control what applications run on those builds. We will need to create storage accounts with page blobs. We will need to look at Azure backup services. And finally, we'll deploy a web app for our social media presence. Now, many of these concepts would have already been demonstrated and shown in yesterday's session. The purpose of today is to allow the end users and the delegates attending the course to be able to get their hands dirty with Azure. That's why we're going to slow this right down. We're going to talk about what we're building as we go through and as they deploy, to allow people to ask any questions if need be. So let's jump into our portal, into a new subscription, and we'll begin building this proof of concept. So under Microsoft Azure, I've just gone ahead. I've got a new dashboard, which I've just named Contoso POC. To do this, you can go ahead and click on New Dashboard and then Edit and just rename as need be. As always, we're going to begin by creating a resource group. Now, if you cast your minds back, a resource group is effectively a repository for all of our resources. So if I go ahead and hold down G and R, I'm going to go ahead and click Add, and I'm going to choose to add a new resource group. I'm going to call this Contoso POC. I want to use my Visual Studio Enterprise with MSDN, and I'm going to keep that in North Europe. At that point, I'm going to pin to dashboard and I'm going to go ahead and hit create. Okay, so our resource group has been created. At that point, we can go down and we can see that we've got our general overview. We can go down and we can see we've got the activity log and a user account control, and we can tag. And we've got some quick start settings in there as well, which will redirect us to documentation. So at this point, what we want to do is we want to now build the virtual network for Contoso. So to do this, I'm going to go up and click Add inside my resource group, and that will redirect me to the marketplace. Now at this point, I want to search for, just type that in again. So I want to search for a virtual network, and we can see that that's coming up at the top. So I'm going to select virtual network. From here, I'm going to select this top option for virtual network, and I'm going to choose to deploy in Resource Manager. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and hit create. I'm going to go ahead and give this virtual network a name of Contoso VNet, and I want to pick an address space of 192.168.10.0/24. So I've picked a Class C address with a 24-bit subnet mask. I'm going to create a subnet inside my address space. I'm going to go ahead and call that production. And under production, I want to create a subnet address range of 192.168.10.0, but this time /25. So I'm effectively halving the addresses in my address space to allow 128 devices to be connected with inside that subnet. Again, I'm going to use my Visual Studio Enterprise with MSDN in an existing resource group called the Contoso POC. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and pin to dashboard and create that resource. This will take a couple of moments, so I'll pause the video and we'll come back when that's completed. And we're back. And we can see that our virtual network has now been created. It's opened up the blade. And as we discussed yesterday, there are a number of settings that I can configure. I can go ahead and I can look at my address space and add additional address ranges in if need be. I can look at any connected devices. I can look at my subnets. So what I'm going to do, as I did yesterday, is I'm going to go ahead and add a new subnet for development. And I'm going to go ahead and put that on a /26 network, which is going to give me 64 addresses. Now, I don't need a network security group at this stage, and I don't need a route table. If you cast your mind back, the idea behind the network security group was to control the inbound and outbound traffic, and the route table would allow me to go in and specify connections and directions of traffic. So I'm going to go ahead and OK, and that will build my subnet, and that will take a moment or two. So we'll just hold on for a second. That's now done. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and add the gateway subnet. Now, by all accounts, I can just leave this as is. I can leave this as a /28, which will give me 16 addresses. I could effectively change that to a /29, but I'm going to leave that as the default. So I'm going to hit OK. Again, that subnet will now build. And any second now, that should be displayed. So there we go, that's now done. Now from here, I can also go ahead and add a custom DNS server if need be. I can set up VNet peerings to connect VNets together within my subscription. I've got the properties of the VNet. I've got the locks, but I've also got the automation script. So what this will enable me to do is create a JSON file, which will enable me to add into my template library or download so I can maybe deploy into something like Azure Stack or even redeploy at a later stage. Another cool feature is if I click on diagram, it's going to show me all of my subnets within that address space and any connected devices in there. If I run into problems, I can also generate a new support request, which will be sent directly to Microsoft. Okay, so with our VNet created, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. It's the nice thing about Azure, it's your world. You can make it look and feel how you want. So I personally like the 2x1 tiles. I'm going to go ahead and OK that. And what I want to do is I want to generate a virtual network gateway that I'm going to be able to use to connect my physical machine into my Azure workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my resource group again. I'm going to go up and click on add. And from here, I'm going to search for a virtual network gateway. I'm going to select my virtual network gateway, and it's this top option here. From here, I'm going to go down and hit create. Now it's going to open up a new blade. The first thing it wants to know is what the name of the gateway is going to be. And I'm going to call this Contoso Gateway. I want it to be for a virtual private network. Now that's going to support point-to-site and site-to-site connections. If you cast your mind back to yesterday, we also had express routes, which was that private connection directly into the Azure network. I want it to be a route-based VPN, and I'm going to go for a basic SKU. Okay, we're not doing much in this proof of concept, so we don't need the extra power that the standard and advanced SKUs offer. In terms of the virtual network, I'm going to go ahead and select the Contoso VNet that we created earlier, and I'm going to choose a public IP address. Now, this public IP address is the public-facing IP address of the gateway, and it's what we're going to connect to from the outside world. So at that point, I'm going to choose Create New. It's given me a name of Contoso Gateway, but I'm just going to put IP on the end. So I've got my Contoso Gateway IP. At that point, I'm going to say OK. Now my subscription, again, is my Visual Studio Enterprise with MSDN. It's in the Contoso POC resource group, which is located in North Europe. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that to dashboard and hit create. And that will then submit the deployment and begin building that gateway. Now, as we discussed yesterday, this is going to take anywhere from between 20 and 40 minutes. So we'll pause the video and we'll come back when that's completed. And we're back, and we can see that our gateway has now been created. So as we did yesterday, what we're now going to do is we're going to go down and we're going to configure it. So to do this, I'm going to come down to point to site configuration, and I'm going to specify what my address pool is that will be leased out by machines connected into this gateway. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 192.168.20.0/25. Okay, from there, I'm going to go ahead and save that configuration. Now, while it's saving, notice that we need at least one root certificate in order to be able to download the VPN client. And it will give us the option here to look at our root certificates and also revoke certificates if need be. Now, at present, there's no way to do this using the graphical tool. So what we're going to do is, while that updates, we're going to jump in to PowerShell. Now, again, you'll have this in your scripts folder on your C drive. From here, what we're going to do is we are going to install the latest modules. We are then going to import the modules and add our subscription. From there, we're going to set our variables. So you'll see that we're specifying what our resource group is, the gateway name, the gateway public IP address. From there, we also specify what we want to create our gateway certificates. Now, the idea behind these certificates is they're going to be used for authentication using the certificate pair. We are going to have a root certificate, and from that we are going to derive a client certificate. And as I said, that will be used when we go to authenticate into the VPN gateway. To do this, what we're going to do is we're going to run a command called makecert. That's going to generate a parent certificate using the secure hash algorithm at 256-bit with a key length of 248 bits. From there, we will generate a client certificate. At that point, we will re-encode using certutil. We will then upload the certificate into the gateway, and we really have two options at this point. We can either use the command get Azure RM VPN client package, which will generate a URL in this window down here, or we can choose to download it from the GUI portal. I'm going to go ahead and run the entire script. Now, bear in mind that this here, install module and import module, will take a little time because what it's effectively doing is it's pulling down the latest features. So that will take a moment or two. Let's go ahead and run that command. So I'm going to run the command. It says the script you're about to run it be saved. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and run it. Now, while that's running, what we're going to see is we will end up with, if I just open up a Explorer window, we should see that we will end up with two certificates in here. Let's just bring that back up. We'll end up with two certificates in here, and we'll also end up with two certificates in our certificate store. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a Microsoft Management Console.exe, and at that point I want to try and add remove snapping, and I'm going to choose to add the certificate snapping for my user account. At that point, I'm going to say OK, and what we'll see in a moment is that we will get certificates under this personal store. So let's jump back into our PowerShell. We can see that the packages are installing, and that's going to take a few moments. And then what will happen is it will ask us to authenticate and log in to Azure Resource Manager. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back at that stage. Okay, so I'm being prompted for my credentials, so I'm going to go ahead and enter my credentials. So danielbaker.info, and from there we're going to go ahead and add our password. It's a personal account, and we'll just go ahead and enter our password and sign in. So at this point, it's now going to go ahead and select my Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. It's now setting the variables. You can see that it's creating these certificates. It's encoding them. If I come back into here and we do a refresh, We can see that I now have those certificates in there for Contoso root and Contoso client. I can also see that I've got Contoso root and Contoso client, which are now in the Cloud and Proud folder. So the script has done all of that for us. At this point, the script is going to be uploaded into the Azure portal. So we'll see that happen in a moment. Okay, so the script is uploaded and you can see it's now inviting us to grab the package and download. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and I've got two options. Like I say, I can either paste this into a new URL window and download it, or I can just go ahead and refresh this page and download the VPN from there. So let's go ahead and quickly look at that. Let's just quickly clean this up. So 2v1, let's move that there, and we'll click inside. And under our point to site configuration, you can now see that I can download the VPN. So I can choose to do it that way and choose AMD 64 or x86. Or like I said, I can open up a new window. I can paste in that URL, and from there, it will download that VPN client for me. So if I go ahead and show that in folder, we can now see that I've got the application there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a command prompt. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that package in. And we're going to go ahead and install the VPN client for Contoso VNet. So at that point, that's now installed. And what we'll see is if I come down into my network window, I've now got the Contoso VNet in there too. So what I'm going to do is at this point, I'm going to go in. I'm going to choose to connect to that virtual network. It's going to launch the client. And once it's validated by using those certificates, what we'll find is if I go back into a command prompt and if I do an IP config, I should now have an IP address, not only for my virtual machine, but I've also got an IP address in there for that PPP adapter of Contoso VNet. So there is my VPN address space that we specified in our VPN gateway. Okay, so we have our networking done. We've created our gateway, we've got our VPN client, and we've got the underlying VNet. What I want to do now is I want to start building these virtual machines. So to do this, I'm going to go back into my resource group, and I'm going to click on Add at the top, which will take us into our marketplace. Now at this point, I want to look for a 2012 R2 data center. And we can see as I start typing it into the marketplace, it then appears. So I'm going to go ahead and say, select the top one. I want a Windows Server 2012 R2 data center. And from here, I'm going to choose to deploy via Resource Manager. Now at this point, it's going to start asking me some questions. The first thing it wants to know is what am I going to call this virtual machine? So I'm going to call this Contoso POC VM1. Okay, so Contoso POC VM1. I want it to be a solid state disk. I'm going to create a user logon name of student, and I'm going to go ahead and enter a secure password for authentication. At that point, I'm going to confirm it. And from there, I'm going to choose my subscription, choose where I want it deployed and the location. Now with that done, what will happen is it will now invite us to choose the size of the machine. Again, if you cast your mind back to yesterday, there are a number of tiers. We have the A series with the basic and standard, the Ds, the DV2s, we have the Gs, we have the N's, we have the S's, and we have the H's. From there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on View All, and I think I'm going to go ahead and choose a DSV2. Now that will give me 2 cores, 7 gig of RAM. It will allow me to attach 4 data disks with a max IOP of 6400. It's got a 14 gigabyte local SSD disk. It's got load balancing support and also premium disk support for those SSDs. And using my MSDN subscription, it's going to be an estimated £60 a month. Again, if you're looking at this and your prices are slightly different, do bear in mind that these prices change depending on how you're accessing the portal. So I'm going to go ahead and select DSV2 and select. Now at this point, I need to configure all of the settings for that virtual machine. The main one being where the disks are being stored. Now, obviously, a virtual machine needs a VHD disk, and this is going to be a binary large object, but also a page object. Okay, so it's a page blob. So I'm going to go ahead and select a storage account. It's going to create a new one, and because I've selected for a SSD disk, it needs to be premium. I'm going to go ahead and call this Contoso POC VM disks. Now this needs to be lowercase and it needs to be unique within the entire string. We can see that this name hasn't been used because we've got a green tick. I'm going to use premium performance and I want it to be locally redundant storage. So 3 copies within my local region. At that point, I'm going to hit OK. So from there, we've now specified where we want the disk to be stored. It's now going to ask us on what network we want it. Well, we only have one network, so it's going to be onto the Contoso VNet, and I want to put it into the production subnet. Now at this point, it's asking me, do I want a public IP address? Now the public IP address is going to allow me to connect into that machine from anywhere with an internet connection. However, that's not strictly very secure unless you tie down with next generation firewalls or network security groups. Because we have a VPN gateway and a VPN client, I'm going to choose at this point not to have a public IP address because we are going to use a private IP address via our gateway. Because we don't want a public IP address, we don't really need to worry about security because it's restricted traffic anyway. However, if we go into our network security group, we can see that one has been created by default for this virtual machine, which is allowing any traffic in using RDP on port 3389 using transmission control protocol. At this point, we're going to say OK and move down to extensions. Now what extensions do for us is they allow us to add additional components into this build. And you can see I can go down, I can add Chef, I can add Puppet in there, I can go ahead and install Microsoft anti-malware, I can add PowerShell desired state configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and on this machine, I'm going to choose to add the extension for Microsoft anti-malware. At that point, it's going to create that package. It's going to ask me, do I want to configure anything else on that extension? So do I want real-time protection? When do I want to do a scan? And the scan times. I'm going to go ahead and OK that. That package will now install as part of that build. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. We can see we have one extension being installed. The next question it's going to ask me is, do I want high availability? Now again, what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to create multiples of these machines. And what it will do is it will put it into separate update and fault domains for me. I'm going to choose at this point not to put it into a high availability set. But I do want boot diagnostic. So I do want to be able to capture the boot login and any screen dumps of this virtual machine. I'm going to choose not to have guest OS diagnostics turned on. And under diagnostic storage account, I'm going to go ahead and create a new storage account. Because it's just logs, I'm just going to keep it as a standard disk. And I'm going to call this Contoso POC diag. And we'll see if it's happy with that. And we can see that it is. So at this point, I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit OK again, and it now takes us down to a summary. Now this does two things. It's gone through, it's done a validation, which we can see as passed. What it will enable me to do is it will enable me to start deploying that machine, but it will also allow me to create the template. And if I click on the template, we can see that I've now got that JSON file, which would allow me to redeploy, add into my template library, and even download to be able to redeploy on premises using something like Azure Stack. I'm going to choose to hit OK, and what we'll see is that virtual machine will begin to create. Now this virtual machine will take between 5 and 10 minutes to build, so we'll pause the video and we'll come back when that's done. And we're back. And we can see that that virtual machine has now been created. So let's quickly go through some of the options down the left hand side. If we start off with overview, that's going to show me my essentials. So the resource group it's part of, the status of the machine, the location, the subscription, the size. Now notice we don't have a public IP address in there. We opted not to have that. And because of that, we can't connect directly into that virtual machine. Now, that's not to say that we can't connect to the machine, it's just that we can't do it over a public interface. So what we can do is, if I just move this to one side, is if I launch my remote desktop connection, we can actually connect into the private address of that machine. Now, this machine has a private address of 192.168.10.4, and we see that by going down into the network interfaces. So if I click on the network interface, we can see that the private IP address is 192.168.10.4. At that point, if I try and connect, it's going to initiate the connection. Now this machine has just started up, so it may fail the first time, but we'll see if we're lucky. No, we're straight in. So from here, if I go and type in my password and hit OK, we can see that that virtual machine now launches, and it wants to know, do we trust the certificate? So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and we're boot in to that virtual machine. So I'm just going to allow that virtual machine to initialize in the background, and what we'll do is we'll look at what's going on in the meantime. So from here we can see the activity log of that virtual machine, and we can go down and we can get some insights from it. We can also choose to export that if need be. We've got our role-based access controlled, so we can set who can access this. We've got tags that we may want to set onto that resource, and we can add some new tags in there. So I might go key virtual machine, and I might say 2012 R2, so we can add our own tags in. Okay, and we can save those tags if need be. I can come down and diagnose and solve problems. So I can go in there and specify some of the troubleshooters, such as I can't connect to the virtual machine or the VM's running slow. But what's nice about that is I can also launch some tools. So I can go in and reset the password, which I can also do from down here. I can go into boot diagnostics, which I can do down here. I could even choose to redeploy the virtual machine, which is a if an all else fails type solution. So if you've tried everything else, you can redeploy it onto a new instance of the virtual machine, keeping your disk and all your data. If you need assistance solving the issue, we can also open a support request too. Now, if I come down, we see we've got availability sets, and I chose not to join that into an availability set. So we haven't specified any fault and update domains. We can see the disks that are associated with that machine. So I can see I've got my operating system disk in there, but I can also go ahead and add additional data disks. Now I can attach an existing disk or create a new one. I can see the extensions that have been installed on that machine, and I can go ahead and add new extensions if I want to. I've got information about my network interface card, and from here I can drill down into it. I can then go in and look at the IP configuration, the DNS configuration, set up a network security group on it too. If I come down, I can choose the size of my virtual machine, so I can choose whether or not I want to scale up to a larger size or scale down to a smaller size. I've also got the properties that I can go into, and as we spoke about yesterday, I can put locks onto this resource, so to protect from accidental deletion. One of the other things that I can do is I can go into the automation script for that virtual machine, and what it will do is it will give me all of the components that I need to be able to redeploy. From here, if I go down into metrics, I can see the account metrics from there. I can also go in and add metric alerts and put conditions in there. From here, I've also got alert rules where I can do similar things, but with alerts, I can also place actions on there. I've got my diagnostic settings where I can specify what information I want to collect. So I can go in and I can monitor my basic metrics, network metrics. I'm going to go ahead and select them all, and that will all be put into my storage account. Okay, so I've got my diagram where I can see all of the components of this virtual machine. So it should show me my virtual machine, my network interface card. It should show me my storage account. So let's just hold on for a second, wait for that to load up. That should be with us any second now. And we can see that we've got our virtual machine, our disk, our network card. We can see that we've got our extensions in there. Again, it's saying that connect is disabled because we don't have the public IP address. But the nice thing about all of these is it allows us to connect into those particular components. If I continue to scroll down, you can see that we have resource health. This is going to tell me what's going on not only with the virtual machine, but also if there's any problems with Azure. I can see my boot diagnostics, which is going to give me my boot logs and also a screenshot of the machine's current state. And then finally, I can go ahead and reset the password, redeploy that virtual machine, and generate a new support request. So what we're going to do at this point is we're just going to quickly clean this up. And I'll drag that up there. What I now want to do is I want to go back into my resource group and I want to deploy a second version of it. So I'm going to go in and say add. I'm going to select a 2012 R2 data center. We're going to redeploy. And again, I'm going to call this Contoso POC VM2. I'm going to put in my username. And password. Everything else there looks fine. Now, as I come down into size, again, I'm going to select a DSV2. So we'll select that. Under settings, the storage account, it already knows that I want to put it into VM disk, already knows the network, the subnet. Again, don't need a public IP address in here, so I'm going to choose to turn that off. Extensions, I'm going to go ahead and add my anti-malware. And we'll just go ahead and accept those defaults. And then boot diagnostics on, guess OS diagnostics off. Already knows the diagnostic disk. So very quickly, we're just running through this. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to allow that machine to build. Now, the reason we want two machines is because I then want to go in and do some desired state configuration. However, while we're waiting, let's go into our resource group and look at the components that have now been built. So if we look at our virtual machine, it built the virtual machine itself, but it then built the network interface card, it built the network security group, it built the two disks. Let's take a look at the disk. So I'm going to go ahead and just pin this one to the dashboard. And we'll just clean that up a little bit and move that to a new location. And then from there, I want to go into the disk to see what's happening. Now, as I go into the storage account, you can see that I can go into activity logs and role-based access control and tags and diagnostics as before. But I've also got some other options. I've got my access keys that allow me to connect into this storage account. You'll notice I have two, okay? And that's for redundancy. I only need one of these keys to connect. If I go down into configuration, I can see the performance tier that I'm using and the replication options. I can choose whether or not I want to encrypt that storage account. And I've also got limited time-based access via shared access signatures. From here, I can generate an automation script too. Now from here, if I go back up into overview, you'll notice that what happened is as I created that virtual machine, it's created a container for me. And I can add as many containers that I need into this storage account. If I go ahead and click container, I can go ahead and create a new container which I can add in there. So I might want to do one for media, for instance. If I go ahead and add media, I now have a new container and a new URL into that resource. If I click on VHDs, from there we can see that I have two VHDs in there, one for VM1 and a VHD that's being created for VH2. From here, I can look at the access policies of this container. So I can choose the access type into it. And I can also go ahead and upload resources. So for instance, under media, I might want to go in and upload an image or upload some sort of file and choose where I want to put it. So into a page blob. Now at this point, I'm going to come back, and what we're going to do is we're going to pause the video for a moment and we'll return when this virtual machine has been created. And we're back. We can see that our second virtual machine has been created. So at this point, we have our network, our gateway, we have our VPN connection in, we've created our storage account and two virtual machines. Now, what I want to do is I want to control what applications run on these virtual machines. And I'm going to do that using automation and desired state configuration. So if I go back into my PowerShell ISE, I've created a very simple desired state configuration PowerShell script that's going to specify one machine as a web server and make sure that IIS is present, and the second machine as a non-web server and making sure that IIS isn't present. Now, in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into my resource group and I'm going to click Add to go into my marketplace. And from there, I'm going to search for automation. From here, I've got automation. And under my results, we can see that I have the Microsoft automation package. I'm just going to go ahead and hit create. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up a new blade and it's going to want me to specify a name. So I'm going to call this Contoso POC Auto. And we can see that it's happy with that. Again, I'm using my subscription, my resource group, and my location, but I want to specify to create an Azure Run As account for the DSC scripts. Now at this point, I'm going to choose to pin to dashboard and hit create. That will now go off, it will begin building, and in a minute or two, we'll be ready to configure. So we'll pause the video and we'll come back when that's done. So our automation account has been created. And what we're now going to do is we're going to come down into DSC configurations. Now from here, when I click on desired state configurations, we can see that none have been found. So I'm going to go ahead and add a configuration in. Now, in order to do this, what I'm going to quickly do is make sure that this file is saved. And then I'm going to choose to upload this file from my computer. So from my C drive, I'm going to go into Cloud and Proud, I'm going to go into scripts, and we can see that I've got my desired state configuration. So we're going to upload that file, okay, and we've got web server DSC, okay, and we'll just go ahead and okay that. And at that point, we can now see that a DSC configuration file is published. So from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the file, and that's going to take me into the configuration. And we can see at the moment, there's no compilation jobs in there. So I'm going to choose to compile this configuration. And when I click on there, it says, are you sure you want to compile this configuration? Any node configurations generated will be automatically placed in the Azure Automation DSC pool server. If node configurations with the same name exist, they will be overwritten. Now, we don't have anything else in there, so that's fine. We're going to go ahead and say yes. It's now going to submit the request, and we can see that's queued. Now, that's going to take a few moments, and once that's built, what we'll be able to do is assign that configuration to our different nodes. So again, let's pause the video, we'll come back when that's done, and we'll start configuring our two virtual machines. So we waited a couple of minutes and we can see that that compilation job is completed. Now what that allows us to do is it now allows us to come back and select our nodes. And you'll notice that I can select an Azure virtual machine or an on-premises virtual machine. From here, I'm going to click on Add Azure Virtual Machine, and I'm going to select the Contoso Proof of Concept VM1. From there, what I want to do is go into Registration, and I'm going to select this to be the web server. So Virtual Machine 1 will become a web server. It will install the packages. It's going to refresh every 30 minutes, and the configuration mode frequency will be every 15. I'm going to choose to reboot the node if needed, and action after reboot, continue any configuration that's needed. We're going to say OK. We're going to say create. Now what that will do is it's going to take a little while because it's going to push the package down onto virtual machine 1. It's then going to install the configuration. So while that's happening, let's go ahead and add the second virtual machine. We're going to select virtual machine 2, and we want to specify that this virtual machine will not become a web server. Okay, so this machine will not become a web server. We're going to say OK, and we're going to hit create. And then what we'll do is we're going to leave this to run, and in about 10 minutes we're going to come back and we're going to check the configurations of those two virtual machines. While we're waiting, let's quickly clean this up. We'll make it a 2x1, and we'll put the desired state configuration underneath our virtual machine. So we're going to pause the video and we'll come back and we'll check up on this in about 10 minutes. So while we're waiting for our desired state configuration to deploy, let's go ahead and create our web presence. So to do this, I'm going to go into my resource group, and I'm going to choose to go add into my marketplace, and I'm going to look for a web app. Now the web app is actually going to create me a brand new app service plan. So let's go through and start creating this. I'm going to say web app. I'm going to come down and hit create. Now at this point, it's going to open up a new blade, and it's going to want to know what the app service name is. Again, this needs to be unique within the Azure Websites.net URL. So I'm going to say Contoso POC web. Okay, we can see that that's happy with that. Again, my subscription, I'm going to use my resource group, and I need to go ahead and create a new app service plan. So I want my app service plan to be in North Europe. I'm going to choose this to be the Contoso POC app service plan, and it's happy with that. For my pricing tier, I can go in and look at all of the different options. So I've got premium, standard, I've got basic. If you cast your mind back to yesterday, we've also got shared and free tiers. I'm going to go ahead and choose the standard. That's going to give me a single core machine with 1.75 gig of RAM, up to 50 gigabytes storage, but it's also going to allow me up to 10 instances where I can auto scale, backup. It's going to allow me staging slots and traffic manager profiles. It's going to do all this for around £27 a month. So I'm going to go ahead and select, and I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So I've now got my app service plan. I'm not going to turn on application insights, but I am going to choose to pin that to my dashboard. So that's now going to deploy. That's going to take a couple of moments. And then what we can do when that's built is we can download our published profile, and we can deploy a website into our Azure portal. So I'm going to go into Visual Studio, and in Visual Studio, all I've done is I've gone open website, and I've selected the website under C Cloud and Proud V2 delivery files. Now from there, I've just made a couple of changes. I've gone down and changed my header to Contoso POC. We can test this. If I go into Visual Studio, we'll run that without debugging, and we can see that we've got our Contoso proof of concept web page for the CSP workshop series, and we can launch into the Cloud and Proud website if need be. From there, let's minimize that, and we can now see that our Contoso web app has been created. Now, again, if we look down on the left-hand side, we've got overview, and we can see that we've got our essential information such as the resource group, the location, the subscription. We've also got monitoring on there. We can come down into our activity log, our role-based access control, tags and diagnostics. But from here, we've also got app deployment. So we can go into Quick Start. We can learn about getting the free tools such as Visual Studio, the Azure SDKs. We can learn about publishing our apps. We've got our deployment credentials that we can use if you want to be able to use Git and FTP services. We can create multiple deployment slots. And again, if you cast your mind back to yesterday, we looked at these multiple deployment slots that we could use for testing and then quickly swap them by changing the VIP. We've got our deployment options that we can go in and we can choose our source for our continuous deployment. We've got our application settings that we can go in and configure. So things like our .NET framework, PHP, Java. We can come down and we can set things like our connection strings and our handler mappings if need be. We can set our authentication and authorization. We can set our backups and whether or not we want backups on there, and we can go in and configure all of this. We can set our custom domain names, okay, and we can even go ahead and buy a domain which will launch us into, I believe, GoDaddy, which will enable us to buy that information. Let's just come out of there. We've got our SSL certificates that we can go ahead and import. We've got our networking, so we can join it into an existing VNet. We can choose to scale up and scale out our app service plans, as well as add in things like tinfoil security in there. We can also create web jobs, push notifications. We can tie in MySQL. We've got locks and an automation script. Now, as we continue to scroll down, you can see that we've got options for our app service plan. We can set quotas on that plan. Okay, so we just wait for this to load up. So you can see that we can set quotas on that app service plan. We can change the app service plan if need be. We can also then choose to clone the app. We can even launch a console connection into that app service plan. So directly from the Azure portal, we can go in and start modifying and changing from here. We've got some advanced tools in there, PHP debugging, we can test, we've got a number of extensions that we can add, and then we've got tools for things like mobile, application programming interfaces, as well as a number of monitoring and support tools. So let's go ahead and go back into overview. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to more and I want to get my published profile. Now that's going to download the credential settings that I need to upload my web page directly into Azure. If we come back and look at our URL, we can see that at the moment, all we're going to get is a page saying that we have a web app, but there's nothing in there at the moment. So we need to upload that. So at this point, let's jump back into Visual Studio, and from our website, let's go ahead and choose to publish the web app. Now to do this, I'm going up to Profile and I'm going to choose to import that published profile that I just downloaded. From here, I'm going to hit Browse. I'm going to select my Contoso Proof of Concept Web Published Settings, and we'll import that into the window. Now from there, you can see that our server, our site name, our connection strings. We can next through this, we can validate the connections, we can choose how we want to deploy. I'm going to go ahead and just hit publish. And what it will do is it will contact Azure. It will then begin to upload that web page into the Azure App Service Plan, and in a moment you should see it open up a new web page to prove that it's been uploaded. So there you go. We can now see under the Contoso Proof of Concept Web, we have our website that's been uploaded into the portal. So with our web app created, let's now go back and check on our desired state configuration. If I come down into my virtual machine, we are in our first one, so VM1, and look, under Server Manager, we can now see that we have IIS. So that desired state configuration has now taken effect and it's actively monitoring those two DSC nodes. If we click on the nodes, we can see that both of those machines are now compliant. VM1 is a web server, VM2 is not a web server. So the last thing that we want to look at in this session is protecting these virtual machines. And we're going to do this by setting up backup. So I'm going to go into my resource group, and from there, under the marketplace, I'm going to search for backup. And I'm going to select backup and site recovery. So from here, I'm going to select Backup and Site Recovery OMS, and I'm going to choose to create that resource. Now it's going to want a name, so I'm going to call this Contoso POC Backup. Okay, we can see our Contoso POC backup name is accepted. Again, subscription, resource group location, that's fine. Let's go ahead and pin that to the dashboard. Okay, so while that's happening, let's move our web app to a new location and we'll just wait for that to deploy. Now that's going to take a moment or two. We can see that it's actually now come up. So from here, as we looked at yesterday, what we're going to do is we're going to come down and we're going to look at some of the options. We've got our properties, we've got our locks, we've got our automation script. But what we're interested in is setting up this backup and site recovery. Now, I don't have any machines to set up site recovery, but as we see before, it's a very simple wizard menu that we're going to drill through. But what we can do is we can now choose to back up our Azure virtual machine. So I'm going to click on Getting Started Backup. The workload running is Azure and I want to back up my virtual machine. So at that point, I'm going to say OK. I then need to go in and look at my backup policy. Now, do I want to use the default backup policy or do I want to go ahead and create a new one? I'm going to choose to create a new policy. I'm going to call this Contoso VMs. And what I want to do is I want to choose these machines to be backed up daily and we'll leave it at the default 630. Okay, so the retention of daily backup point, I'm going to do it at 630 for how many days? I'm going to say I want it for, let's say 30 days. I don't need weekly, I don't need monthly, and I don't need yearly. Again, you can put all those in, but for the sake of our demo, 30 days retention is fine. I'm going to say OK to this. And at that point, I need to select the items that I want to back up. So from here, I'm going to select Contoso POC VM1 and Contoso POC VM2. You can see that I've got two virtual machines selected, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And at that point, I'm going to submit those deployments, and we can see that the deployment has now started. So we're going to wait a few moments, and then what we'll be able to do is come back and look at the options now that we've chose to protect those virtual machines. And we're back. And we can see that that configuration has now succeeded. If I go back into Overview, under my backup items, you can see that I've got Azure Virtual Machines and I've got two instances in there. Now, if I click on Azure Virtual Machines, we can see that I've got Contoso POC VM1, Contoso POC VM2, but there's also warnings there to say that the initial backup hasn't been done. Now I've got two options here. If I click on the virtual machine, I can wait for the scheduled job to start, or what I can actually do is go ahead and click Backup Now. Okay, and it's just a case of clicking on the button and off it goes. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come back, and what I'm going to do is I'm now going to look at another way that I can back something up. So I'm going to come down to backup items, and at this point what I want to do, excuse me, if I go up to getting started backup, at this point what I want to do is I want to choose to back up on premises, and I'm going to select files and folders. Now when I hit OK, you can see that it wants me to prepare my infrastructure. So I'm going to go ahead and install the recovery service agent. That's going to pull down the Mars installer. And at that point, we're going to go ahead and install the agent. So again, we're pulling down the Mars installer. I'm going to next through the wizard and go ahead and install any required components. Now, while that's installing in the background, what I need to do is I need to generate my Vault credentials, and that's going to act as a pairing between my Mars agent and my Azure service plan. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and hit download. We can see that the Vault credentials have been created, and as I go back into my Mars setup, I'm going to go ahead and proceed to registration. Now at that point, it's asking for my Vault credentials. I can go ahead into my download where I can see the Vault credentials that have been downloaded. Now it's important to note that these Vault credentials are valid for 48 hours. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. It's going to validate those credentials, and from there I can go next. and I need to enter a passphrase. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to generate a passphrase, and I'm going to choose to back that passphrase up into my documents folder, and we're going to hit finish. So at that point, it's going to register the server with Microsoft Azure Backup, and that's going to take a moment or two. We can see that the server has been successfully registered, and we're now attempting to set the security key. That's now done. At this point, we are good to go. Our Mars agent is set up. So if I close this, it's now going to launch the Mars service. We can see that we've got our Microsoft Azure Backup support. From here, I'm going to go ahead and look at scheduling a backup. And again, from here, all it's going to allow me to do is to set my recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives. So from here, we're going to select the files and folders that we wish to back up. I'm going to choose to back up my C Cloud and Proud delivery files folder. From here, I'm going to go next, and my backup schedule, I'm going to back it up every week on a Sunday night, and that'll be fine. So I'm going to back it up every Sunday. At this point, my weekly retention plan is I'm going to back it up at 2 a.m. for X amount of weeks, and I'm just going to put that in as 6. My initial backup type, I'm going to choose to back up over the internet, or I can choose to do an offline backup. Now, by doing an offline backup, what I can do is I can extract those files, I can ship them off to Microsoft, and they can do the initial copy for me, which means additional backups will only be the Delta changes. From here, I'm going to say next, and I'm going to go ahead and finish to confirm that backup schedule. Now, once I've created that backup schedule, just like before, I can go ahead and immediately back up those files by clicking on Backup Now. So we can see that I now have the option to back up now. And if I click Backup Now, what it will do is it will fetch the policy information, specify the files that I need, and then back up directly into the Microsoft Backup platform. So we'll leave that running for a moment, and we'll come back in a bit when that's done. Okay, so we can see that that backup job is completed. That's now on Azure. Obviously, it will allow us to go in and recover the data if we need be. But if I now minimize this, and if we go back into our overview, we should see that only do we have our virtual machines, but we've now got files and folders in there. As I said before, if I had an on-premises location, what I could do is I could go in under site recovery, and I could get it to replicate that whole infrastructure either to a secondary physical location or up into the Azure environment. In this video session, we looked at building our proof of concept for Contoso for the CSP Azure Workshop program.